Pearl Wells realized she wanted Sam Carly at the exact moment she decided she would never act on it. They were standing too close in the corridor, close enough that she could feel the warmth of his body without touching him, close enough that stepping back would have made the moment obvious. His hand was braced against the wall beside her shoulder, not trapping her, not touching her, just existing there with quiet intention. The air between them was heavy, intimate in a way that had nothing to do with effort. Hi family, I need you to please help subscribe and watch my video to the end. Please remember to subscribe to my channel. Let us continue. Move, she said calmly. Sam didn't move immediately. Not because he was playing a game. Because he was aware, acutely, of how still she was, how steady her breath remained despite the tension tightening her shoulders. He lowered his arm and stepped aside without a word. Pearl walked past him, her pulse betraying her composure. She didn't slow until she reached her office. When the door closed behind her, she leaned her forehead briefly against it. Not out of weakness, out of irritation. She hated moments that unsettled her. She hated how quickly desire announced itself when she had no intention of answering it. Sam Carly stood where she had left him, staring at the blank wall she'd been pressed near moments ago. He exhaled slowly, grounding himself. He wasn't reckless with attraction. He understood restraint. What surprised him was how natural the moment had felt, how unforced, how mutual. They had met 3 weeks earlier, briefly in passing. Names exchanged. Nothing memorable. Today was different. Today something had shifted into focus. Pearl spent the rest of the morning reminding herself why she kept her distance from men like him. Men who were observant. Men who didn't talk too much. Men who respected silence. Those were the ones who slipped past defenses unnoticed. At noon she found him in the break area, alone, scrolling through his phone. He looked up when she entered, his expression neutral but attentive. "You okay?" he asked quietly. "Yes." Pause. "You don't sound okay." "I didn't ask for concern." He nodded, accepting the boundary without offense. "Noted." She poured herself water, aware of how closely he was watching without staring. It wasn't invasive. It was deliberate. "Earlier," he said, "I didn't mean to corner you." "You didn't," she replied. And that was the truth, which unsettled her more than accusation would have. They stood in silence again. Pearl hated how comfortable it felt. Comfort led to familiarity. Familiarity led to vulnerability. Vulnerability was expensive. Savannah Brains walked in midway, took one look at them and smiled knowingly. "Interesting timing," Savannah said lightly. Pearl ignored her. Sam offered a polite nod. Later that day, Pearl acknowledged the truth she had been avoiding since the corridor. She was not emotionally unavailable because she lacked desire. She was unavailable because desire complicated things, and Sam Carly had already complicated her without trying. Sam, on his part, recognized restraint when he saw it. He didn't view Pearl Wells as distant or difficult. He saw a woman who chose control because she understood what it cost to lose it. And still, when he thought of her pressed close to him, calm and unflinching, he knew this would not remain simple. Pearl returned home that evening unchanged in routine but altered in awareness. She undressed slowly, her thoughts uncharacteristically scattered. She did not fantasize. She did not imagine outcomes. She simply acknowledged the pull, and locked it away. For now. Because Pearl Wells was emotionally unavailable on purpose. And Sam Carly, whether he intended to or not, had already tested that purpose. Sam Carly did not follow Pearl Wells out of the building that evening, even though he knew exactly what time she left. He noticed patterns easily. Not in a predatory way, more like a habit formed from years of paying attention. Pearl arrived early, left on time, never lingered. She didn't pretend to be busy when she wasn't. She simply moved with intention, as though her life had been arranged to avoid unnecessary overlap. Sam respected that. He stayed at his desk longer than usual, not because of work, but because leaving at the same time would have felt like pursuit. And pursuit, he knew instinctively, would close whatever narrow opening had appeared between them earlier. Pearl, walking to her car, was aware of the absence before she acknowledged it. She had expected, without wanting to expect, that he might appear behind her, say something casual, turn the charged moment from the corridor into something ordinary. When he didn't, she felt an unexpected flicker of irritation. It passed quickly. Irritation implied investment, and she refused to indulge that. At home, Pearl followed her routine with precision. Shoes by the door. Hair loosened. Dinner reheated, eaten standing at the counter. She did not sit to reflect. Reflection invited questions. Questions invited answers she had no interest in confronting. Still, when she lay in bed later, her mind returned to the way Sam had stepped aside without protest. No apology heavy enough to demand reassurance. No lingering look meant to pull her back. He had simply let her go. That restraint unsettled her more than persistence ever would have. The next day, Sam kept things exactly as they were meant to be. He greeted her once, briefly. He spoke to her only when work required it. He didn't reference the corridor. Didn't search her face for signs of discomfort or invitation. From the outside, it looked like nothing had happened at all. Pearl noticed everything. She noticed how he never positioned himself too close again, even in tight spaces. How he gave her room without making a point of it. How his attention, when it came, was focused and efficient, not weighted with expectation. By mid-morning, they were seated side by side in a smaller meeting room, reviewing timelines. The table forced proximity. Pearl felt it immediately, the quiet awareness of another body near hers, familiar now in a way she didn't like. Sam kept his gaze on the document between them. "Your estimate here," he said, tapping the page lightly, "is conservative. It's realistic." "I agree," he replied. "Just confirming. No challenge. No ego." Pearl underlined a figure and slid the paper back toward him. Their fingers brushed briefly. Accidental. Inconsequential. Her breath hitched anyway. Sam felt it too. He didn't look at her. He didn't allow the moment to expand into something else. He moved his hand away and continued speaking, his tone unchanged. Pearl hated how much effort it took not to react. Savannah Brains, watching from across the room, caught the exchange and raised an eyebrow. She said nothing. Observation, she knew, was more effective than commentary. At lunch, Savannah joined Pearl uninvited, settling into the chair across from her with an ease Pearl had never discouraged but never reciprocated. "He's not chasing you," Savannah said between bites. Pearl didn't look up. "There's nothing to chase." "That's not what I said." Pearl closed her container. "You're projecting." Savannah smiled slightly. "No. I'm recognizing restraint." Pearl finally met her gaze. "You're reading meaning into professionalism." "Professionalism doesn't make the air feel like that," Savannah replied calmly. "Relax. I'm not suggesting romance. I'm suggesting awareness." Pearl stood. "I'm aware enough." She walked away before Savannah could respond. Sam, meanwhile, spent the afternoon working through a quiet internal discipline. He did not deny attraction. Denial made desire louder. Instead, he acknowledged it and set it aside. Pearl Wells was not a woman to approach impulsively. Whatever existed between them would either develop naturally, or not at all. He had learned long ago that chasing created imbalance. And imbalance destroyed whatever followed. Late in the day, Pearl stopped by his office with a question she could have sent by email. She stood at the doorway, arms crossed loosely, posture composed. "Your revision," she said, "shifts the deadline." "It does." "Why?" "Because I don't want to rush what needs precision." She considered this. "That affects my team." "I know. You didn't ask. I didn't assume you'd object." Her lips pressed together briefly. Not displeased. Not pleased. Just thoughtful. "Next time," she said, "loop me in." "I will." She hesitated, then nodded and turned to leave. "Pearl," Sam said. She stopped but didn't face him. "I won't overstep," he said quietly. "In any sense." She turned then, studying him with an expression that revealed nothing and measured everything. "I didn't accuse you of that." "I know." A pause stretched between them, dense with unspoken recognition. Sam held her gaze steadily, without challenge, without retreat. Pearl broke the moment first. "Good," she said and left. Alone again, Sam leaned back in his chair, letting out a slow breath. He had meant every word. Not as strategy. As truth. Pearl returned to her office, closed the door, and stood still for several seconds. Sam Carley didn't chase. He didn't press. He didn't test boundaries to see how far they would bend. And that, she realized with a quiet unease, made him far more dangerous to her carefully maintained distance than anyone who ever had. Because restraint, when shared, created its own kind of intimacy. And Pearl Wells was beginning to feel it. Attraction did not announce itself loudly between Pearl Wells and Sam Carley. It settled in quietly, like something inevitable that had no need for approval. By the third week of working together, Pearl had stopped pretending she didn't anticipate Sam's presence. She didn't look for him deliberately, but she registered him instinctively, the cadence of his footsteps, the brief pauses before he spoke, the way he occupied space without claiming it. He existed near her with a calm assurance that neither demanded nor withdrew. That was the problem. Attraction without permission was unsettling because it bypassed logic. Pearl was accustomed to choosing carefully what she wanted, who she allowed near her, when she engaged emotionally. This felt different. This felt like awareness before intention. Sam, for his part, was equally conscious of the shift. He noticed how Pearl's replies had softened, not warmer, just less rigid. How her eyes lingered a fraction longer during conversations. How she no longer left immediately after meetings, as though time had loosened slightly around him. Neither of them spoke about it. They worked late one evening reviewing documents that required concentration rather than discussion. The office was quieter than usual, the hum of distant traffic filtering through partially open windows. Pearl removed her blazer, folding it neatly over the back of her chair. Sam noticed, not because it was provocative but because it signaled comfort. "You can head out if you're done," she said without looking at him. "I'm fine," he replied. "I'll finish this section." She nodded, returning her attention to her screen. Minutes passed in silence. The kind that felt deliberate rather than awkward. Pearl became aware of her breathing, of the subtle shift in posture she made when she leaned back. Sam noticed the change and adjusted slightly himself, maintaining distance while acknowledging proximity. Attraction lived there, in restraint. When Pearl finally stood, stretching her shoulders slightly, Sam looked up. "You're tense," he said. "I work," she replied. "So do I," he said evenly. "You carry it differently." She studied him then, her gaze direct, assessing. "You observe too much." "I pay attention," he corrected. "That's rarely neutral. Neither is avoidance." The words landed without accusation. Pearl considered them, then gathered her things. "I didn't ask for analysis," she said. "I didn't offer advice." Another pause. This one sharper. As she passed him, their shoulders brushed lightly. Unavoidable in the narrow space. Pearl felt it immediately: heat, awareness, the undeniable recognition of another body responding to hers. She did not stop. She did not accelerate. Sam remained still, grounding himself with deliberate control. Attraction was not an excuse for action. He had learned that discipline created space for something real to emerge, or dissolve. Savannah Brains noticed the shift the next day. She didn't comment immediately. She waited until Pearl was seated, reviewing notes, her expression thoughtful in a way Savannah recognized. "You didn't sleep," Savannah said. "I slept enough." That wasn't an observation. That was an instinct. Pearl closed her folder. "You're pushing." Savannah leaned back, unbothered. "I'm naming something that's already present." Pearl didn't respond. Later that afternoon, Sam asked Pearl to walk through a revised plan with him. They stood side by side at a whiteboard, the markers unused. Words were unnecessary. They understood each other easily now, finishing thoughts without interruption. "You're anticipating my concerns," Pearl said. "I'm learning your priorities. And you think that's appropriate?" "I think it's effective." She turned slightly, their faces closer than intended. The space between them felt charged, not urgent, not reckless, just undeniable. "This isn't permission," she said quietly. "I know," Sam replied. "I'm not asking for it." That honesty disarmed her more than persuasion would have. Attraction without permission felt dangerous because it existed outside rules. Pearl had structured her emotional life around consent, her own, always deliberate. This attraction ignored structure. It lived in proximity, in silence, in mutual restraint. That evening, Pearl caught herself imagining Sam's presence in her space, not in fantasy but in familiarity. The thought unsettled her. Familiarity led to expectation. Expectation led to vulnerability. She shut it down immediately. Sam, alone in his apartment, acknowledged the truth plainly. He wanted Pearl Wells. Not urgently. Not impulsively. He wanted her presence, her attention, her trust. He understood that wanting did not entitle him to action. Attraction without permission required patience, or surrender. Neither of them was prepared to surrender yet. But both understood, with quiet clarity, that whatever existed between them had already moved beyond indifference. It had entered a territory where restraint was no longer absence, it was choice. Savannah Brains did not believe in pretending not to see what was obvious. She believed in timing, in reading rooms, in choosing the right moment to speak. And by the middle of the fourth week, it was obvious enough to name. Pearl Wells, for all her discipline, had begun to slip in ways that were subtle but telling. She paused before responding now. She listened more than she spoke. Her attention drifted, not dramatically, not disruptively, but enough for Savannah to notice the difference between control and distraction. They were leaving the building together that evening when Savannah finally spoke. "You're attracted to him," she said plainly. Pearl didn't stop walking. "No." Savannah matched her pace. "That was an answer you rehearsed." Pearl exhaled slowly, irritation flickering briefly across her expression. "You're assuming something you can't possibly confirm." "I'm observing," Savannah replied. "The way you tense when he enters a room. The way your voice shifts when you speak to him. The way you don't roll your eyes when he disagrees with you." "That's not attraction," Pearl said. "That's professionalism." Savannah smiled slightly. "Professionalism doesn't make you quieter." They reached the parking area. Pearl stopped beside her car, keys in hand. She turned to face Savannah, her posture composed but alert. "You're crossing a line," Pearl said. "No," Savannah replied calmly. "I'm standing on one you've already stepped over." Pearl didn't respond immediately. Silence for her was not avoidance, it was assessment. Savannah waited, unbothered. "Even if," Pearl said eventually, "there's something there, it doesn't require commentary." "It requires honesty," Savannah said. "With yourself at least." Pearl unlocked her car. "I'm honest." "You're controlled," Savannah corrected. "That's not the same thing." Pearl closed the door without replying. That night, alone in her apartment, Pearl replayed the conversation despite herself. Savannah's words were not accusatory. They were observational. That was what unsettled her most. Pearl prided herself on self-awareness. She did not deny feelings, she simply managed them. Yet Sam Carly existed outside her management system. She acknowledged that attraction was present. She rejected the implication that it required action. The next morning, Savannah said nothing. She did not push. She allowed the truth to settle where it would. Sam noticed the shift in Pearl before she did. She was more distant, not cold, just precise to the point of rigidity. Conversations shortened. Eye contact reduced. She repositioned herself physically, maintaining clearer boundaries. Sam understood immediately. He did not react. He adjusted his own behavior to match her recalibration. No lingering conversations. No shared silences. Only what was necessary delivered without weight. That restraint cost him more than he expected. Attraction, when unacknowledged, did not disappear. It sharpened. Later that week, Savannah found Sam alone in the break area. She did not approach him casually. She approached him intentionally. "You don't chase," she said. Sam glanced at her, surprised but composed. "No." "Good," Savannah replied. "She doesn't need that." He studied Savannah briefly. "You speak like you know her well." "I do." "And you speak like you're intervening." "I'm clarifying," Savannah said. "For both of you." Sam considered this. "Clarifying what?" "That this isn't confusion," Savannah replied. "It's fear managed very carefully." Sam nodded once. "I'm not in a hurry." Savannah smiled, satisfied. "That's why I said something." Pearl learned of this exchange later, not from Savannah but from her own observation. She noticed the ease with which Savannah and Sam acknowledged each other afterward. Not familiar. Just understanding. It irritated her. That irritation forced reflection. Pearl had always believed that emotional distance preserved autonomy. Yet here she was, expending more energy maintaining distance than she would have spent acknowledging attraction honestly. The realization did not soften her. It sharpened her awareness. She confronted Savannah that evening. "You spoke to him," Pearl said. "Yes." "You had no right." "I didn't speak about you," Savannah replied. "I spoke about restraint." Pearl folded her arms. "That's still interference." "No," Savannah said gently. "That's naming the dynamic." Pearl's jaw tightened. "You're invested." "I'm observant," Savannah replied. "And I respect you enough not to let you pretend this is nothing." Pearl looked away. Attraction had not weakened. If anything, being named had given it form. She was no longer managing an abstraction. She was managing a man, measured, restrained, attentive, who mirrored her control rather than challenging it. That night, Pearl admitted the truth privately. This was not a passing awareness. It was sustained. Quiet. Intentional on both sides. Sam Carly did not chase because he did not need to. His restraint was not strategy, it was character. That made him dangerous to her defenses. Savannah had called it what it was. And once named, it could no longer be dismissed. Pearl understood then that avoidance would not dissolve attraction. It would only delay confrontation with herself. She did not know yet how she would respond. But she knew with certainty that this was no longer nothing. The shift wasn't dramatic. There were no confrontations, no confessions. Just subtle realignments in the space they shared, small movements that changed the rhythm of their days without anyone announcing it aloud. Pearl Wells had always controlled her environment. She had routines, boundaries, schedules, an internal order she protected fiercely. Sam Carly disrupted that order simply by being present. He didn't overstep. He didn't demand attention. He didn't chase. Yet, by existing with quiet assurance, he forced Pearl to reconsider the rules she had lived by for years. The first indication came during a project review. They were seated side by side, papers spread across the table. Sam's hand brushed against hers, not deliberately but inevitably as they reached for the same document. Pearl pulled back slightly, a subtle reflex, but Sam didn't react. He didn't apologize. He didn't overcompensate. He simply adjusted his posture, leaving her space intact, as if acknowledging her unspoken boundaries while also signaling he would not retreat. It was maddening. Pearl had thought she could dictate the terms of every interaction, every inch of personal space, every pulse of attention. Sam proved her wrong without ever challenging her. That, she realized, was power. By midweek, she noticed herself pausing before responding to him. Words she would have fired off mechanically before were now measured, chosen deliberately. She felt the tension in her chest, the way her pulse quickened subtly when he stood near, leaning slightly over documents, his presence commanding attention without a single word. Sam noticed too. He adjusted effortlessly to the new dynamic. He allowed her the appearance of control while slowly shifting the equilibrium between them. Meetings that once felt purely transactional now carried undercurrents of awareness. Conversations that had been neutral were charged, tiny glances, the briefest brush of fingers, the way she straightened when he entered a room. Pearl hated that she noticed. One afternoon the power dynamic became almost tangible. They were walking together toward the break area. The hallway was narrow, their shoulders nearly brushing. Pearl hesitated, caught between the need to maintain distance and the awareness that Sam had already stepped inside the invisible perimeter she had drawn around herself. "You're quieter than usual," Sam observed, not looking at her but speaking softly, casually. "I'm efficient," Pearl replied, keeping her gaze forward. "Efficiency has a sound," he said lightly. "You're hiding it." Pearl paused, the words catching her off guard. They weren't accusatory. They weren't flirtatious. They were simply true. She turned slightly, eyes meeting his, and for the first time she realized that the power she thought she held was contingent, fragile even. He gave her no space to claim dominance. He didn't push her, and yet, in his restraint, he commanded the room. He was a presence she could not ignore, a reality she could not wish away. Later that evening, Pearl returned to her apartment feeling simultaneously in control and completely unmoored. She hated the tension Sam created, not because it threatened her life but because it challenged the system she had spent years constructing to protect herself. She had always defined her power in isolation, in discipline, in detachment. Sam had shown her that power could be challenged by mere presence, by awareness, by intention. The next day at work, the shift continued. Sam didn't need to act, and Pearl didn't need to surrender, yet the balance had tilted. She noticed the way she responded to him before thinking. The way she adjusted her posture subconsciously. The way her mind lingered on moments that had previously been inconsequential. An accidental touch, a shared laugh, a glance that lasted too long. During a team discussion, Sam leaned over the table to point something out, and Pearl felt her chest tighten for no reason she could articulate. She looked away, forcing herself to refocus. Yet she couldn't ignore the subtle impact of his proximity, the way he moved in her world without demanding entry, the way he shifted power without asserting control. Savannah noticed the change immediately. When Pearl and Sam returned from the discussion, Savannah smirked knowingly. "You've noticed it too," she said softly. "I'm aware of many things," Pearl replied, bristling slightly. "Power dynamics included," Savannah said lightly. "Don't act like he hasn't changed your rhythm." Pearl said nothing. She didn't need to. Savannah's observation was accurate. Sam Carly had done what no one else had managed. He had unsettled her without force, without drama, without a word of persuasion. He had simply existed, and in that existence he had shifted the balance of control. That evening, Pearl sat alone, reflecting on the small adjustments she had made unconsciously over the past week. Her movements, her thoughts, her restrained awareness. She realized that Sam's presence was no longer something she could ignore, nor did she want to. That realization was dangerous, intoxicating, and yet entirely unspoken. Sam Carly had demonstrated a subtle truth. Real power was not about domination, nor about surrender. It was about presence, patience, and the unspoken claim one made simply by understanding another person. Anne Pearl Wells, for all her self-imposed discipline, recognized that she was no longer in full control. The shift had happened without ceremony, without words, without confrontation. But it had happened all the same. She didn't hate it. She hated that she didn't hate it. It happened on a Thursday late in the afternoon, when the office was nearly empty. The hum of the air conditioning and the distant city noise created a strange intimacy, a space where even silence carried weight. Pearl Wells was reviewing documents at her desk, meticulous and composed, but she could feel the tension building in the room like electricity waiting for a spark. Sam Carley approached quietly, holding a stack of files. He didn't knock or announce his presence, but Pearl noticed him immediately. His calm presence filled the space, drawing her attention despite herself. "Pearl," he said softly, his voice just above the hum of the room. "Can we go over these before the meeting tomorrow?" She nodded, gathering the papers. As they walked toward the small side office to spread out the documents, their movement brought them close. Too close. The corridor narrowed and instinctively she tried to step aside. Sam did not. He stopped, letting his hand lightly rest against the wall beside her shoulder, not trapping her, but existing there with undeniable presence. Pearl's heart beat a little faster. She didn't know why, because nothing had happened, nothing was supposed to happen. But everything shifted. The air between them thickened, charged with awareness that had nothing to do with intention. "You're tense," Sam said, his voice steady, measured. "Not a question. Just observation." "I'm fine," Pearl replied, forcing her voice to stay even. He didn't move. He didn't say more. He simply remained close enough that she could feel his warmth. Her body reacted despite her mind, tightening slightly, shoulders stiffening, pulse accelerating. Pearl wanted to step back, to reclaim control, to reset the boundary. But she didn't. Something in the way Sam held his presence, unassertive yet commanding, kept her rooted in place. He leaned slightly, speaking softly over the files between them. "This section here, you've accounted for every detail, but I think there's a way to make it cleaner." She glanced at the notes, then up at him. Their eyes met, and for a moment the room seemed to shrink. Pearl felt her pulse spike again, not fear, not excitement exactly, but something closer to awareness of herself. She hated that feeling. She hated how good it felt. Sam noticed the subtle shift too. His lips curved slightly, almost imperceptibly, but he didn't move closer. He maintained balance, never taking, only offering space in which Pearl could exist. And yet, by existing, he disrupted her equilibrium completely. "You don't have to," she started, hesitating. "I know," he said. "I'm not asking for anything." Her chest tightened, her carefully curated control fraying at the edges. Then, instinctively, Pearl straightened and reached for the documents on the corner of the table. In doing so, she brushed against Sam's arm, accidental, unintended. Her body betrayed her as heat surged through her. He didn't flinch. He didn't acknowledge it. And that made it all the more impossible to ignore. Pearl moved to finish arranging the files, but he was still close. Their shoulders brushed again in the narrow space, and she felt herself shiver involuntarily. Not from cold. Not from fear. From the awareness that Sam Carley could exist in her space without taking it over, and that her body responded despite every intention to remain unmoved. She wanted to step away. She wanted to break the moment. But she couldn't. She began, her voice low, but he interrupted gently. "Shh. We don't have to say anything," he said. The simplicity of his words, the calm certainty, disarmed her more than any gesture could. Pearl realized then that the attraction between them had never required declaration. It had grown quietly, intentionally, without anyone needing to acknowledge it. Sam straightened, removed his hand from the wall and stepped back just slightly, not out of distance but to give her space. And yet, even in stepping back, he maintained a presence that filled the corridor. Pearl exhaled, suddenly aware of her own breath. She looked down at the documents in front of her, forcing herself to focus, to anchor herself back to control. The files lay arranged neatly, the papers unwrinkled, the work accomplished. And yet, nothing had been resolved. Nothing had been broken. Nothing had been declared. But in that brief, wordless moment, shoulders nearly touching, proximity acknowledged, restraint maintained, something fundamental had shifted. Pearl Wells knew, with quiet, reluctant clarity, that the rules she had relied on were no longer sufficient. She wasn't afraid. She wasn't ready to act. But she would not ignore it either. And Sam Carley, observing the subtle rhythm of her responses, knew that the moment mattered far more than any spoken words. He let her regain composure without interruption, understanding that the power of their connection existed precisely in the restraint they both maintained. Pearl finally straightened completely, organizing her papers with careful precision. Sam nodded once, quietly, and left the corridor, closing the distance without drawing attention. Pearl sat back, hand pressed lightly against her chest, feeling the shiver still lingering, a proof of the undeniable, unspoken pull between them. For the first time in weeks, Pearl Wells realized that attraction didn't need permission to exist. And neither control nor distance could undo what had already begun. Pearl Wells woke the next morning feeling the aftermath of the previous day's proximity. It wasn't a hangover or even regret. It was awareness, the subtle weight of something she had neither invited nor resisted but could no longer ignore. Her morning routine, usually precise and emotionless, now carried a tension she couldn't shake. Coffee burned her tongue as she sipped mechanically, her mind replaying the corridor, the files, Sam Carley's calm presence, and the way her own body had betrayed her restraint. She hated that. Hated that he had done nothing deliberate and yet left such an impact. At the office, the consequence manifested immediately. Pearl noticed herself walking a little differently, sitting with her shoulders slightly straighter, avoiding eye contact only to catch glimpses of him when she thought he wasn't looking. Sam, predictably, did not chase, did not comment, did not draw attention to their previous encounter. But he was present, aware, patient, unobtrusive, and yet entirely impossible to ignore. During the morning briefing, Pearl's team noticed subtle changes too. She was sharper in her questions, more deliberate in her tone, and yet slightly distracted. She caught herself running through the corridor moment in her mind and had to pause before responding to a colleague's question. The tension was palpable, contained, professional, but not invisible. Sam noticed it immediately. His gaze remained neutral, careful, focused on the work, but he registered the micro-shifts in her behavior. He could read the subtext without needing acknowledgement. That was the danger. He had learned her patterns already. He knew which moments to push, which to hold back, and which to simply let exist. The first consequence, as Pearl discovered, was that she was thinking about him constantly. Not in overt longing, not in fantasy, but in calculation. How he moved, how he spoke, how close he would stand without violating boundaries. Her careful mental architecture of control had cracks now, and they were forming in places she didn't anticipate. By midday, Savannah Brains noticed the tension radiating from Pearl. "You look distracted," Savannah said lightly, sliding into the chair across from her. "This isn't work fatigue." Pearl shook her head, masking awareness. "Just busy." Savannah smirked knowingly. "Don't lie to yourself. That man, he's present. And you're aware. That's all you need to admit." Pearl said nothing. She didn't need validation. She needed clarity, which she realized she lacked. The second consequence manifested in subtle irritability. Pearl found herself slightly sharper with colleagues, her patience thinner than usual. She hated that Sam's mere presence could disrupt her composed exterior, even indirectly. She was meticulous about her emotional presentation, and here was someone unraveling it without effort. By late afternoon, the third consequence revealed itself: curiosity. Pearl caught herself observing him more than necessary, noting habits she had previously ignored. The tilt of his head when he considered a document. The steady cadence of his speech. The way he didn't adjust his posture to impress or dominate, yet still commanded attention. She noted these things consciously because unconscious noticing implied vulnerability. Sam, during the same afternoon, observed her as well, but with restraint. He did not comment. He did not react. He simply noted, mentally cataloging the subtle shifts that indicated she was processing more than she admitted. That awareness was itself a consequence, reinforcing the unspoken tension between them. Pearl's final consequence of the day occurred as she prepared to leave. She walked toward her car, rehearsing calm and indifference, when she realized she was slightly aware of how Sam had exited the building earlier. She wasn't imagining proximity, but she imagined a presence, an invisible weight that made her chest tighten unexpectedly. By the time she reached her apartment, Pearl Wells understood the truth. Consequences weren't dramatic. They didn't arrive with confrontation or confession. They arrived quietly, invisibly, by shifting internal landscapes. And Sam Carley had managed to leave multiple marks without saying a single word. She sat down at her kitchen counter, absent-mindedly stirring tea. She knew that if this continued, she would have to confront her feelings, or continue pretending they didn't exist. And she hated that thought. She hated the possibility of losing control, of admitting that restraint had limits. But deep down she also knew that the alternative, ignoring the pull entirely, was impossible. Sam Carly had introduced a force in her carefully ordered life. Not urgent, not demanding, but inevitable. Anne Pearl Wells, no matter how disciplined, could no longer deny it. The consequences were subtle, patient, cumulative. They weren't crises. They were shifts, each small and deliberate, each one forcing her to reckon with an attraction she hadn't consented to, but couldn't deny. Anne Pearl, alone in her apartment, felt the quiet sting of awareness settle over her. She would not act tonight. She would not chase. But she understood now that the rules she had trusted her entire life had been rewritten. By Sam Carly's silent design. Pearl Wells did not plan to speak to Sam Carly about what had been building between them. She never planned to acknowledge the tension, the draw, the subtle moments that left her unsettled yet aware. Yet, on that Friday afternoon, she found herself standing outside his office, documents in hand, heart beating faster than it should have for a professional matter. He looked up as she entered, calm and composed as always. He did not rise, did not offer a greeting that carried warmth or flirtation. He merely lifted his gaze, attentive, observing. "I need to clarify something," Pearl said, placing the papers carefully on the edge of his desk. Her fingers brushed the surface, not touching him, but close enough that she felt a sudden, involuntary awareness of him beside her. Sam nodded slightly. "Go on." Pearl took a breath, steadying herself. She didn't want this to be a confession of longing. She didn't want it to be romantic. She wanted it to be factual, an acknowledgement of the truth that had been impossible to ignore. She began and stopped. The words refused to come. He waited patiently, not pressuring, not expecting, not reading too much into her pause. That patience alone disarmed her. "I'm aware," she said finally, her voice low, measured, precise, "of what exists between us." Sam's expression remained neutral, unflinching. He nodded once. "And I'm aware that it complicates nothing for you," she continued, "because you don't pursue, you don't press. You exist alongside me and it affects me. Not you. Not anyone else. Just me." Sam exhaled softly. "That's fair." Pearl looked at him, studying the calm certainty in his posture, the way he allowed her space even while acknowledging the tension. It was unnerving. She had built systems to control her emotions, to avoid vulnerability, to remain untouchable. And yet, here was someone who had entered her carefully maintained world without breaking it, but still altered everything. "I don't want to overstate this," she said, her voice firmer now. "It's not a demand. It's not a confession of wanting more. It's simply an acknowledgement that I feel it. And I need you to know that." Sam leaned back slightly, fingers steepled, considering her words with the calm detachment that had unnerved her from the start. "I know," he said quietly. "I feel it too. But I won't force it. I won't complicate your life unnecessarily. That's not my intention." She met his gaze directly. "I appreciate that. But you need to understand something. My control, it matters. If anything crosses a line, I'll remove myself. That's non-negotiable." "Understood," he replied. And it wasn't lip service. He meant it. For the first time, Pearl realized something fundamental. She didn't have to fear him, nor did she have to suppress awareness of what existed between them. Sam Carly didn't demand or pursue. He simply existed, as steady as her own discipline, allowing the tension to live without chaos. "That's all," she said finally. "Nothing more needs to be said." Sam inclined his head. "Agreed." And yet, even as she turned to leave, Pearl felt the quiet weight of recognition between them, unspoken, restrained, mutual. This confession had no romance. No declarations. No promises. It was a simple acknowledgement of reality. The tension existed, undeniable, acknowledged by both parties without needing to become a performance or drama. Pearl walked back to her desk, calmer than she had expected, yet strangely aware of the lingering heat in her chest. Sam returned to his own work, steady, attentive, unchanged on the surface, but with subtle awareness of her presence that she would notice in fleeting glances, brief exchanges, and the unspoken rhythm they had established. For Pearl Wells, this was enough. It wasn't love. Not yet. Not even desire in the way she had feared. It was clarity. It was honesty without romance. And in that honesty she found a strange, controlled peace. Sam Carly had become a constant in her thoughts, a presence she could not ignore, yet a man who respected boundaries without being distant. That balance, the recognition of tension without the imposition of it, was intoxicating. Pearl finally understood that acknowledgement could be enough. That attraction didn't always need a chase. That confession didn't always need romance. For now the balance was maintained. The tension existed. And both of them understood the rules, silently, perfectly. It was adult. It was measured. And, in its own way, it was everything that mattered. Pearl Wells had always made her decisions with precision. Nothing was left to chance, nothing left unexamined. And yet, the presence of Sam Carley introduced variables she had not accounted for, variables that were subtle, deliberate, and impossible to ignore. By the start of the following week, Pearl realized that every interaction with Sam carried weight. The brief moments in the hallway, the accidental touches of shoulders, the quiet exchanges over documents, they weren't dramatic, but they demanded attention, reflection, and choice. And Pearl was nothing if not deliberate. The choice became unavoidable one Tuesday morning. Sam had called her into the small conference room to review an urgent project. The office was quiet, the lighting soft, the space narrow. They stood close as they examined the documents spread across the table. Pearl noticed the familiar warmth of his presence, the subtle awareness in his gaze, the way he moved without forcing space but without overstepping it. She felt a twinge of something she had long denied, desire tempered by awareness. "Pearl," Sam said softly, "I want you to know I respect whatever choice you make here. No pressure. No expectation. Just clarity." Pearl paused, studying him. He didn't smile. He didn't attempt charm. He didn't try to manipulate. His honesty was quiet, steady, and completely disarming. "I understand," she said carefully. "And I appreciate it. But you must know that I will choose carefully. And nothing about this changes my autonomy." "I wouldn't expect it to," he replied. She took a breath and shifted her weight, straightening her shoulders. "Then let's be clear. Whatever develops between us, if anything, it will be deliberate. We will act only with awareness, not impulse. Do you agree?" He nodded once, eyes meeting hers without hesitation. "Completely. Adult choice. No games." Pearl felt a subtle shift in herself at that moment. The acknowledgement, the mutual respect for boundaries, the careful consideration. It allowed her to recognize that attraction did not require chaos, and desire did not require surrender. She could want him, be aware of him, even let herself experience the tension without losing control. "Good," she said finally, letting the words carry the weight of her decision. "Then we continue as we have, aware, deliberate, responsible. And if we ever cross a line we reset." "Agreed." "Agreed," Sam confirmed. It was a choice that required self-discipline. It required restraint, honesty, and courage. Pearl had always known how to make adult decisions, but this was different. This wasn't about career strategy or social perception. It was about acknowledging desire without losing agency, attraction without losing control, intimacy without obligation. For the first time, Pearl recognized that adult choice didn't mean avoiding consequences or suppressing feelings. It meant embracing awareness, making conscious decisions, and owning them fully. And in Sam Carley, she had found someone who mirrored that understanding, who could exist alongside her desire without imposing, who respected the same rules she lived by. That afternoon, Pearl returned to her desk with a sense of clarity. Her mind was not distracted by unspoken tension or unacknowledged longing. She had chosen consciously, knowingly, deliberately. And that choice allowed her to engage fully with her work, her environment, and even the subtle pull Sam created without overstepping. By evening, she realized that adult choice was liberating. She didn't have to chase. She didn't have to run. She didn't have to fight her own awareness. She simply had to act with intention, and accept the consequences of that intention. Sam Carley, observing her from his own desk, allowed himself a quiet acknowledgement. The balance had shifted, subtly, but in a way that would support something real if they allowed it. No games. No rush. No false gestures. Just two adults navigating the undeniable pull between them with awareness, patience, and mutual respect. Pearl's chest felt lighter than it had in weeks. The tension was still there, undeniable, unspoken, thrilling in its restraint. But now it was contained, recognized, honored. And, for the first time, she understood that choosing responsibly could also mean choosing freely. Her decision was made. Adult choice had been exercised. And in that decision, Pearl Wells felt both power and relief. Pearl Wells had spent weeks maintaining control, awareness, and restraint. She had acknowledged attraction without permission, recognized the subtle shifts in power, and even voiced the unspoken tension without inviting romance. Yet none of that prepared her for the quiet intimacy that developed between her and Sam Carley, a kind of connection that didn't need fanfare, dramatic gestures, or declarations to exist. It began simply. Shared coffees in the morning when deadlines allowed. Brief, deliberate glances in meetings. The occasional brush of fingers when exchanging documents, neither forced nor avoided. The world around them remained busy and chaotic, but the space they occupied together was calm, steady, and fully their own. Pearl noticed it first, the way she felt anchored by his presence rather than disrupted. Sam had become a constant, a weightless assurance that she didn't have to chase, didn't have to resist, and didn't have to explain. He existed alongside her desire, acknowledging it without needing it to manifest, allowing attraction to flourish quietly, deliberately. One evening, as the office emptied, Pearl and Sam found themselves reviewing a project in the small side office. The sunlight slanted across the room, soft and warm. They worked side by side in silence, each absorbed in the documents yet aware of the other. Pearl straightened, brushing a strand of hair from her face, and caught his gaze. Sam's eyes met hers calmly, without expectation, without urgency. And in that simple exchange, a world of understanding passed between them. No words were needed. No gestures dramatized. It was enough to know they were present for each other in full awareness. "You're quiet," Sam said softly, breaking the silence, not as a comment on her focus, but as acknowledgement of the shared space. "I'm content," Pearl replied, choosing her words carefully, not to flirt, not to withhold, simply to state the truth. "That's good," he said, a small, genuine smile tugging at the corners of his lips. "Because this, what we have, it's enough, isn't it?" Pearl considered this. It was enough. Enough that she could feel attraction and awareness without needing action. Enough that desire could exist without urgency. Enough that the tension between them didn't demand noise, declaration, or public acknowledgement. It simply existed, real and palpable, quietly sustaining them both. She realized then that this was the kind of love that didn't need validation. That didn't need chaos to prove itself. It was measured, deliberate, restrained. It was respect, awareness, and connection all in one. It wasn't dramatic or performative. It didn't scream for attention. It simply was, and that was precisely why it was powerful. Sam leaned back slightly, eyes studying her calmly. "I like this," he said quietly. "The way it just exists. No pressure. No performance. Just us." Pearl allowed herself a faint smile. "I like it too," she admitted. And in saying it, she didn't diminish herself or her control. She merely acknowledged the truth, as deliberate as everything else she did. Weeks passed, and their connection deepened in the same quiet, unobtrusive way. They learned each other's rhythms, understood unspoken signals, and respected boundaries with a patience that left neither feeling incomplete. Neither needed to dominate. Neither needed to chase. They simply existed together, aware of the bond forming, nourished by trust, discipline, and restraint. Pearl Wells, for the first time, realized that love didn't have to be loud to be real. Attraction didn't have to be reckless to be felt. Desire didn't have to overstep boundaries to be acknowledged. Sam Carley, quietly present and steady, had shown her that the strongest connection could be silent, measured, and mutual. And Pearl Wells had finally allowed herself to accept it. Not as a conquest, not as surrender, but as a deliberate choice. The kind of love that doesn't need noise because it is already unmistakable in its presence. They worked together, existed together, and when their hands brushed, when their eyes met, or when silence stretched between them, it was enough. It was perfect. Because some love, Pearl realized, doesn't require words. It doesn't need declarations or dramatics. It simply needs awareness, and the courage to let it be. For Pearl Wells and Sam Carley, that was everything.